Another big name is disappearing from the UK retail sector. Children's wear chain Mothercare. Other well-known brands have already shut up shop, and many more are struggling to survive. It's having a drastic effect on town centres. So how do we save the high street? The UK has been described as a nation of shopkeepers, but more and more high street businesses are closing their doors. Faced with rising costs and online competition, the shopping industry has suffered many casualties, and that's impacting on local communities. Analysts say there's a retail apocalypse, but can it be averted?
High street shops could be slowly dying out. In the UK, 32 major retailers have closed since 2008, according to the Office for National Statistics. Some are calling it the death of the high street. The latest closures are baby clothes store Mothercare and music store HMV. In the US, it's been called a retail apocalypse, with well-known popular fashion shops like Forever 21 and Diesel Jeans filing for bankruptcy. In Australia, shops have been closing due to skyrocketing rent prices. Analysts claim the increase in online shopping is also to blame for this retail crisis, while others say retailers have to do more to entice consumers. UK Consumer Association Which says the death of the high street may be overstated, as many independent shops are thriving. But for many retailers and towns and city centres, the problems are all too clear.
Let me introduce today's guest. Joining me at the Roundtable is Karl McKeever, retail expert for Visual Thinking Group; Prem Sikka, Emeritus Professor of Accounting at the University of Essex; James Singer, a retail space planner; and Elias Jahshan, editor of Retail Gazette. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Prem, let me start with you, because how is it that a company as well known and as established as Mothercare fails? What's it done wrong?
I think there are many reasons. Some are to do with its own business model, which is primarily selling through brick and mortar shops and not paying enough attention to online shopping. And online shopping is a big factor. But there are many other factors too, some beyond its own control. For example, people's purchasing power has been severely depleted because of austerity and low wages and the shelf-stacking economy that the UK has built up. As a result, people have less money to spend, and they've been unable to deal with that. There are lots of other things. Lots of shops are complaining about high rents, but there is actually no simple answer to that, because many of the shops and shopping malls are owned by property companies who are interested in ever higher rents, and they just continue to push for them. So there is no real competition when it comes to the rental market in the high street and town centres. That has contributed to this, and there is inevitably unfair competition as well with the online entities who can operate from backstreet warehouses at low cost, low rents, and compared to some of those who are operating from traditional town centres. And the government has really failed to tax these online companies in a decent way to secure a decent competition.
In fact, we will talk about government policies in a moment. Karl, a lot of people point to online retail as being one of the biggest competitions that businesses are facing in the high street, both big businesses and the small individual retailers. Do you agree? Is online retail killing the high street?
I'm not sure I do, actually. I think online has been a tremendous game changer. It's opened up a new channel to consumers, and certainly in the UK, it's been very enthusiastically embraced. But again, if we look at Mothercare, there's lots of reasons, and Prem alluded to some of those, why Mothercare has failed. But one is certainly one of relevance. As a brand, it was very slow to transform, only recently really getting behind online shopping. But fundamentally, its bricks and mortar stores were behind the times. You know, you have to look at the different forms of parenting now that exist in the UK. Even the name is perhaps out of step with the way that modern families approach how they deal with childcare.
I was quite surprised to find that Mothercare had opened yoga studios in some of its stores for a short time. That was a pretty short-lived idea and clearly didn't work.
And I think Mothercare has had lots of mini renaissances, throughout its long history. For many of its years, it's sort of languished along, though, doing a little bit here, a little bit there. It's never really upped its game sufficiently. And I think that's what the internet has really done. It's meant that, given the vast choice online, the fact that you can shop 24/7, 365, the internet of everything is now real. For physical stores, they have to deliver at a different level. An amazing store experience, fantastic service, outstanding visual merchandising, and you really have to give retailers and customers something that's distinctively different. If all retailers look the same, why visit one? You might as well go online.
Elias, some analysts talk about a retail apocalypse. Is that fair, or is that too strong a term?
I personally think it's unfair. I think it's very easy to fall into that trap to say, oh, there's a retail apocalypse or the death of the high street. It's nice cash grabs for tabloid newspapers, but the reality is the high street and the retail industry is just evolving. It's going through growing pains. It's dealing with the rise of online.
Well, for some of them, it's more than just growing pains. A lot of them are going into receivership or closing their doors.
Of course, yes. And I think the reason why they're going into receivership is because they're realising that they can't just rely on their bricks and mortar estate to generate income. They have to evolve how they deal with customers and how they sell their products. And as Karl was saying, these bricks and mortar retailers, they need to sort of focus on customer experiences and really focus on unique visual merchandising to really draw the customers in. Otherwise, they can easily just go to online. So it's evolving, and some retailers are growing. There are a few retailers out there that are bucking the trend. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but the ones that are doing well are the ones that tend to have a smaller store estate. For example, Selfridges, Fortnum & Masons, some of the smaller batch of independent retailers that don't really focus online, they do really well. Not only because they have a smaller estate, but because they offer something that other retailers do not offer. Whereas the ones that have chains all over the country, a prime example, Mothercare, Debenhams, they're struggling because they've got to deal with this store estate with rising rent costs and also rising business rates, which is a massive effect, factor in that.
I mean, this is what you look at, isn't it? As a retail space planner, what kind of ideas can shops use to protect themselves from these kind of external problems?
Well, one of the interesting things that we've noticed is that the internet is important, but it is not the be-all and end-all. If you look at a company like Primark, they are doing fantastically well with no internet focus on the business at all. And it's because they have a distinctive brand and a distinctive offer. People know why they're going to Primark and why they're going to Primark over John Lewis or Marks & Spencer's. So there's a distinctiveness of the offer, an attraction to go to that specific unit. Alternatively, there's what else is in the area. There's looking at the area as a whole, and this is coming on to how high streets work, whether or not there's a cluster of similar kind of units that provide that shopping experience, whether or not you can graze as you shop, you can stop at a coffee shop, you can have a muffin and a coffee as you go along. It's that kind of experience that you're not going to replicate at an online retailer.
And this is one of the problems, that if you have too many shops in a high street that close down, you lose all of those other businesses around that as well. So as a holistic thing, there is a massive knock-on effect on high streets, isn't there?
Absolutely, but it also works the other way around. What the other uses surrounding retail offer retailers, offices and residential units within high streets and town centres, whether on the upper floors or on the outskirts, provide a footfall, provide customers for those retailers where it may be just popping somewhere for lunch or after work, and it's easy to pick up a present or something on your way home. That's something that can also build up that footfall.
And that kind of social experience, I was going to say, is what you lack from online shopping.
Absolutely, and I think what retailers have really been grappling with over the last 10 years is how to transform their businesses quick enough. So the internet and e-commerce has arrived very quickly and it's been enthusiastically embraced. And it's caught many of the legacy retailers on the hop. They simply haven't been able to transform what they're doing fast enough. But we're now seeing those green shoots, and I think it's very important to, as you say, to recognise it's not all bad news. There are big retailers like Primark, which don't have a transactional website. They use the online experience to actually almost warm up the consumer by showing them things that they can buy, but they still insist that the customer comes in store. Another big retailer like Next, over 50% of their directory online orders are both collected and returned to a Next store. So it's recognizing that the shop itself still provides a vital role, but that role is changing. When you can get everything online, the store itself must do something differently. More experiential, higher levels of service, more entertainment, more engagement.
I mean, that sounds like a really common sense approach to me. One wonders why not all businesses can use that. Prem, you were, as an example, Elias was talking about some shops which have done really well. He mentioned Selfridges. Selfridges is an example of a big department store that has managed to stay relevant, whereas others like Debenhams and BHS arguably haven't.
I think one of the issues is also the location. If you go to a comparatively wealthier area, you will find more shops are open. If you go to a comparatively poorer area, more shops are closed. So that again draws attention to the availability of disposable income that people have. So if you look at Harrods coming up to Christmas, you will see it's pretty busy. But if you go to a poorer areas, they're kind of struggling. So it in a sense takes us back to the broader economic context in which these businesses flourish. Okay, they can have a very distinctive online or not strong online model, but at the end, if they are in areas which are depressed, they are going to struggle. And that is what is happening. Many of the areas which were previously doing okay because of the demise of, let us say, manufacturing and hard industry, people there are struggling.
And the problem is that when you lose these businesses, the impact on employment, on job losses, on the whole atmosphere of an area is completely changed, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, when shops close, it affects consumer confidence, it affects consumer spending. And as Prem was saying, the fewer shops that are in the area is indicative of the local area's socioeconomic status and stuff. So if there's fewer disposable income, then that's going to have a knock-on effect with consumer confidence and consumer spending. And there's already this uncertainty, the external economic uncertainty that's plaguing the UK right now.
Yeah, I'm sure Brexit's not going to make things any more.
So I think that's impacting everything, and it's in many ways, rather than just having a knock-on effect, it's having a snowball effect when it comes to consumer confidence and what have you.
Okay, let's talk about, because Prem, one of the very first things you said was it's not just online, which is a problem. Government policies. How far have government policies contributed to high street difficulties? Could it do more? Is it a question of high business rates, high corporate taxes?
I think, as I mentioned earlier about the income, just to provide a context, around about 1976, barely 40 years ago, workers' share of the GDP was 65.1%. At the end of 2018, it is 49.2%. That is the biggest drop ever since the records began in that short period. Then in addition to that, you generally find the personal debt is about 1.6 trillion. People simply don't have the capacity to borrow and buy. So what are people doing? They are cutting out or reducing or even eliminating discretionary expenditure. Not going to cinema, not going to cafes, restaurants, making clothes last a bit longer, mending the shoes. So there's a whole issue about austerity economics, which has affected it. On business rates, it is very difficult for local governments to do anything. Since 2010, the local government funding by the central government has been cut by 26% in real terms. That means they simply don't have the resources to remodel the town centres, rejuvenate the town centres.
Do you agree with? I mean, this is not, you work with councils, don't you? And is this a problem that local councils are having?
It is. There are also opportunities available, though. One of the things you mentioned was a reduction in discretionary spending, but that's also an opportunity for an increase in vintage wear, second-hand clothes shops, which have seen a massive renaissance and in some areas have become a key attraction. So what you're starting to see is an evolution of the pattern of draw of shoppers, what they're going to certain areas for. You then start to look at how flexible policies are in order to allow high streets to respond to this rate of change, whether or not certain frontages are restricted, so you'll just be left with a series of vacant units who are trapped in that use, or whether or not they are enabled to change under certain circumstances to bring in alternative uses that would benefit the area.
Is this something that central government is looking at? I mean, I know there's, the various political leaders have said that they will give more help to local businesses in the retail sector, but are we seeing that in any meaningful way?
So the funding that has been announced, and there's been various tranches of it, it does help in isolated pockets where there are regeneration schemes going, but regeneration isn't the be-all and end-all. And there are changes in national policy and planning terms that have helped take back some of the restrictive wording that recommended some of those blocks on changes. But it's also there's also a duty for local authorities to work with the market to try and respond to this, to make sure that they both protect their town centres, but at the same time balance that with bringing in new uses, alternative ideas that can also bring people onto the high street and bring spending onto the high street.
Sorry, I was going to say, and I think some of this comes down to the imagination of the local authority. There are plenty of examples where the high street are not all declining. It's not all doom and gloom. If you just look at somewhere like Altrincham up in the northwest of England, it has won countless awards now for the way it's regenerated and rejuvenated itself. This hasn't been done through cash. This has been done through ideas, through energy, through local people coming together because they believe that retail matters. So whilst I take on board that, in real terms, perhaps some of the money in people's pockets is less than before, you also have to look at the way that consumers spend money differently. Today, many people spend more on their TV subscription and their mobile phone bill than they do on buying decent groceries. So it's very easy to just look and say there's less money around. It's just that is money being spent on different things.
Predict consumer trends or appeal more to what consumers want, then you might have a more viable business.
I'm very much of the school that if you make something good enough, exciting enough, interesting enough, people will come. I think part of the problem is there's been too many shops offering similar things in a similar way, and people have just got very jaded with the experience. The same thing happened in the casual dining sector. But where brands are distinctive and they're delivering something which is quite different and unique, and they capture the consumer's imagination, then business is good.
Is this a problem unique to the UK? I mean, America's seen a lot of retail premises close, hasn't it? Sears and Forever 21.
Definitely in America. And where I'm from in Australia, we're going through a massive upheaval with retail as well. And you've got to understand, Australia's got a population that's less than half the population of the UK. It's about 24 million people. And so the diversity of retailers in Australia is really small compared to the UK. And the problem they're going through is much more keenly felt because of that. And there's only 2 major department stores, 2 major grocers. There's hardly any diversity. And so from my experience growing up in Australia and before moving to the UK, the retail industry in Australia is absolutely going through massive upheaval. And they don't have the luxury to pin the blame on Brexit or anything like that. They don't have the luxury to say that they went through the financial crash because they weathered the financial crash. So Australia has gone through, in its own way, an own soul-searching journey for their retail sector. It has parallels to the UK, but it's very different in the sense that Australia doesn't really have a culture of the high street. It took after America in terms of it's all about the shopping centres and town centres. And Westfield has a monopoly in the UK. Almost every suburb in Sydney and Melbourne has a Westfield. They're nothing like the Westfields in London. But so in many ways, Westfield is doing quite well in Australia, but the other smaller shopping centre chains are trying to catch up. And Amazon was only recently introduced in Australia, and there was a lot of hype in the build-up to Amazon's launch, which was only just last year, that was going to be a massive game changer in Australia, but it's hardly done any changes. I think it's because eBay already had a monopoly in the online market in Australia. So it's very hard to say.
I was going to say, is it that we're seeing an evolution? So in terms of there will be a high street, but it's going to be a very different looking high street in future? Is that what we're saying?
I think perhaps in the 90s, retailers got a little bit lazy, business was good, the economic cycle was very positive, and they entered into a space race. They opened more and more stores doing similar things. ultimately, that bubble ran out and burst because of the internet. But in the more recent years, what you've seen is those imaginative brands, and brands who certainly have got some deep pockets, have been able to reposition themselves and do things differently. But to take your point, what will the high street look like in 10 years from now? Yes, there might be fewer shops, but I think the shops we have will be robust. There'll be good stores in big places, and there'll be smaller outlets that might have a different format. You know, already in Asia, you can see that there are some convenience vending store only formats, which are literally autonomous stores, but they satisfy a need. There isn't a service requirement other than the fact that they are there and they can dispense goods. So what we're going to see is what retailers always do: apply imagination to a problem, they will reinvest, and with the internet, they can join together their operations in a seamless experience.
Haven't we seen this kind of evolution from quite a few years in the past? I mean, we talk about high streets. I remember when I was a kid, people talking about post offices closing everywhere and high street banks closing. So we're seeing a constant evolution, aren't we?
One of the things that we've really noticed when looking to the future is there's a real benefit in a more holistic view, and that is retailers working with their neighbours, landlords working with their neighbours, and potentially the local authority or developers in some instances facilitating that, bringing people together to create complementary uses, clusters, destinations, an event space that works well with a leisure space, that works well with food and beverage.
So that's down to a planning level, isn't it?
It's planning partly, but it's also the actual landowners. Planning will only get you so far. You need the landowners, the retailers, the developers, the local community to get on board, own their own place, cultivate their own home.
So if people want their high street to survive, they basically have to work together to make that the case.
Partly, yeah.
I think it's recognising that everybody's a stakeholder. I get very frustrated and often quite disappointed myself when I go into stores and I get, less than satisfactory service, let's put it politely. But I think, it's incumbent on all brands to work with their in-store teams and everybody that's involved in the retail experience to really get people thinking about the basics. Every time you disappoint a customer, they're likely to go elsewhere.
Right.
Every time you give a shoddy store experience, people might be inclined to go and shop online. Therefore, it's not enough for people to kind of wring their hands and to look to each other and everybody get into a cycle of woe. What people have got to do is to look within and dig deep and say, we can do something about this, but it's going to mean that we have to work together as a team, whether that's the town centre, whether that's landlords coming together. But fundamentally, this is the staff within brands saying, we're not going to let this happen. We're going to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and get on with this and make it better.
Because there are economies where retail is very strong, aren't there?
Well, certainly are. I mean, I've been to Scandinavian countries and you certainly find less shops closed, partly a function because they have less income inequality. People have fairly more even spending power. Also, the equivalent of our high street is more diverse. Lots of craft shops, private shops. So in a sense, that is what we need. The problem is that our local authorities, which are supposed to be managing local economies, have in many ways been disenfranchised. They don't have enough resources. I would personally like to see the law changed so that if a shop is empty for 6 to 12 months, it is then becomes subject to a compulsory purchase order if necessary. Local authorities can buy, remodel, whatever they want to do, and then engage with the property companies who own the shopping malls, but in a different way. So I went around, just to give you an example, went around one small shop. They were paying about £1,100 a month, barely space for 2 people to stand. They're repairing shoes, cutting keys, and they cannot really basically survive. So looking through their books and getting some financial numbers, it occurred to me that the cost of servicing that shop unit, if you were borrowing money to set it up, was about £500 a month. And they were paying about £1,100 a month. And it just seemed to me if local authorities could buy these places, set a minimal rent, and then the rest is linked to turnover.
So
higher the
quickly, because
turnover,
we're coming to
higher
the
the
end.
rent.
Do you, what are your guys? What are your thoughts on that? On a more active involvement in keeping these retail spaces open?
I do believe that the local communities do need to band together and do more to help out and rejuvenate their local high street, local town centres. But it needs to be a two-way street. It can't just be all, but the burden can't just be put on the local residents. It needs to come from high up as well. So there needs to be government reform. But there also needs to be some action from the actual retailers themselves.
As I say, at the end of the day, surely it's down to the business to adapt to give the customer what they want and stop them going to online shopping.
And if customers fundamentally want to see the high street saved, they need to get out there and shop. And, this is about saying, online exists and it serves a purpose. But if you really want a sense of community, entertainment and engagement, meet friends and socialise with people, there's no better place than your high street.
Christmas is a big time for retailers. So this will be make or break for some businesses, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that it's going to be a good year for shopkeepers, a good Christmas. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining me. A pleasure to have you here on Roundtable. And remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for TRT World Roundtable. For now, from me and all the team here, bye-bye.